So you guys talk.
So you're going to tell me about the Lake County War.
All right, I'll start with that, the Lake County War. Actually, when the Lake County War started, it was 1874, and that was 2 years before Colorado became a state, 1976. And the people involved, Lake County at that time was a huge county. Now it's been broken up into several counties, but it was a great big county extending into the western slope, what we call now the western slope. And settlers came here, and down in the where now we call it the Centerville area, some of them had established ranches, and one rancher was kind of ornery. Some of the earlier ranchers were not liking other ranchers to come in and take land, and they were kind of feuding back and forth with each other. And one fellow down there had a ranch that he was trying to get the other guy to leave. I think he was just trying to give him enough trouble that he thought he might move away again. And his name was, gee, I can't think. Do you remember his name? The one that
got killed?
The one that got killed, yeah. Mm-hmm.
No, not right now. I will in a minute.
Okay, it takes a second to get. But anyway, he was
Harrington.
Harrington, yes. He was already established, and this fellow moved in as a neighbor, and he was doing ornery little things to him, like shutting the creek off so the other fellow couldn't irrigate or get water to his animals, and he would. But one time he went kind of far. He actually, the one fellow was trying to do some haying with his horses, and he had his horses hitched to a wagon, and then he had to go do something. And this Harrington came over and got his horses, unhitched them from the wagon, and took them to do some work for him. And they had a huge argument over that. Finally ended up in a fist fight. And so they went back to their homes, which weren't that far away from each other. That night, Harrington woke up and noticed that an outhouse was on fire. We're not sure the shed or a toilet or what, but one of his outhouses was on fire. And as anybody would do, he went running out to put it out. When he went running out of the house, someone up on the hill shot him and killed him. Well, a lot of people that were Harrington's friends immediately blamed this other fellow. And they decided that he had reason. You know, they'd been fussing and fighting and having a hard time. So they were going to go get him. And but you know, he claimed he had nothing to do with it. And finally, they didn't have a sheriff here. They had a constable that performed weddings and things like that, but no one that was really considered a sheriff. And so the fellow that was accused of this decided that he better go to Denver and get some legal, help. And so some of his relatives went with him, and the ride across South Park and going in to Denver for them was kind of reminded me of Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. Remember when they were riding and these people were, well, I guess people across the South Park area and all the way to Denver were kind of helping them. Like, they would go there and they could stay and they would give them fresh horses and they'd go on. And he got to Denver and he explained the whole situation, that he was being framed, that, people were, he didn't do it, but people were thinking he would, and he was afraid he would not be tried honestly here. Well, there were no judges either right here. So anyway, they had a little trial for him in Denver, and they acquitted him because they said there wasn't enough evidence. Just some people thought he did it. And back in those days, they didn't check bullets and all that kind of thing. So anyway, he thought that was good. He was acquitted. And word got back here. He came back, but he found out that that was not going to be the end of it. They started what they called a committee of safety, which was actually a vigilante committee. And it was not of safety at all. It was just, then the people that belonged to that were, you know, going around and they were going to take care of him. They thought if they didn't do anything to him in Denver, that they would take care of him here. Not with a trial, but just go ahead and hang him. And so they went to the house at night, and I guess it must have been at some time of year where it was kind of wet. Maybe they'd had some kind of a storm, and they were yelling at him to come out, and of course he wouldn't. He was in the house with his wife and then a neighbor lady who'd lost her husband and a couple of kids. They were all in the same house. And he kept saying no, he wasn't going to go out. You know, he knew what they were going to do to him, and he refused. And so they decided they would burn him out. They would start a fire on the house and make him come out. And they were having trouble getting stuff to burn because everything was wet. And they piled up some stuff against the front door and were trying to. And so he told them he had a little peephole that he could put a gun out of in case of Indians or something, you know. And he told them that he had this gun trained on him, and it was a shotgun. And he said, "Anybody start that fire, and you know, I'm gonna shoot you." And a guy bent over to do it, and he did. He shot him in the rear end, and then off they were scattering. You know, they were running around, and actually the one guy, I guess, eventually died of the wounds, and someone else was wounded too. But they took off finally then, because they thought he was really serious about, you know. So then he realized he had to leave, and he took off again, and went to Denver, and. Then this time, I guess he caught a stage or something else and left the area completely because he felt, you know, he knew he would not live over here. But the trouble is, he left a lot of his friends and relatives here. And the vigilante committee, the safety business, they started taking it out on anyone who was his friend or his relative, and they did all kinds of things to people. They burned barns, they chased off cattle, they there were a lot of people that died mysteriously, and they really don't know if it was caused by someone or whether it was an accident. But anything that happened after that, they more or less blamed on the Lake County War thing. Because there were two different groups of people, some that supported him and some that supported Harrington, and there was not any law around to actually do anything much about it. So it was bad for a while. People fell down wells. That was blamed on it. You know, they didn't think it was an accident. They thought they were thrown down, and different people were threatening. And then they had what they called kangaroo courts. They'd take people in and ask them questions, and if they didn't answer correctly, why, they would do all kinds of things to them. And it was getting so people in the area were afraid to sleep at night without leaving someone to watch. You know, they had to take turns watching for people to come because the chances of getting burned out and everything were pretty high. And finally, a judge that was the son of a famous preacher in the area, Judge Dyer. His father was considered Father Dyer, a preacher there in the area. Anyway, he the courthouse then, because it wasn't a state yet, was in Granite. He said that if someone would, you know, arrest these people and he could get some witnesses to testify against them, he would start trying to prosecute some of the people that had been terrorizing the whole area here. And so anyway, they were going to have a trial. It was in July. just before we became a state, 1876, and he was going to have a trial in Granite, and he wrote to his father the night before. He said that that he was under surveillance, that the Committee of Safety or whatever had people watching him, and he was really afraid that his witness was going to take off because they'd been threatening him too, and so he was wondering what would happen to him. And the next morning he went in, and of course the witness had taken off during the night. He was scared, took off, and the fellow, the judge was going to say, okay, we're not dismiss the trial because they didn't have anybody there to do anything. And he just stood up, but 3 men stood up in the courtroom and shot him. All 3 of them. They each shot him and killed him in his courtroom. And that was really an outrage. And finally, Colorado in August 1st became a state, and then they started sending in some federal marshals and stuff like that. And things really settled down about the Lake County War. And I think another thing, I think a lot of people had just really thought it's gone too far. They were actually just killing people right in front. There were a lot of witnesses that saw these guys just stand up and shoot him. And so I think they thought then they got back on their horses, rode back to their ranches, and went on with their business. So there was so much bad feeling about the Lake County War that Jack and I remember that even when we were in high school, there was one author that said he was wanting to write about the Lake County War, but that a lot of people, when he would bring it up, they would get real upset and they wouldn't talk to him, and there was still a lot of bad feeling. There were some, and we noticed that there were some people in town that they would still, if one family walked in the store, the other family walk out, and there was a lot of bad feeling for a long time about what had happened during that war. So, okay.
Good. Cool.